I like to grab an assortment of things to get me started. This does not mean that I'm limited to what I grabbed, but it's so much easier to stay inspired, stay in that workflow when you have a good amount of stuff surrounding you that you've already pre-chosen and decided goes with your project. I have some larger scraps of paper and smaller scraps of paper. I really wanted to try to use scrap a majority for this. This is a small project. I have so many scraps. It's always great to find a way to be able to check your stash and see the things that you've been saving. The other thing is I always love to add fabric whenever possible. So I have some different scraps of fabric and of course some thread. And this is a good start to get me going. I offer a free class called Fringe Flipbook, and that's what we're going to be working in today. If you're not familiar with this class or this book yet, let me give you a quick little preview so you can see inside of it and see kind of what we'll be working on. So we already have stuff on some of our pages. We have a mixture of plain pages and stuff with interactive flip outs and tags, things like that. So not every page will be needing the same amount of work. Instead of starting on page 1 like I oftentimes do, I'm just going to flip until I find something that's inspiring. I don't know that I'm going to be working on a page by page basis here. I kind of just want to go with the flow, search my scraps that I pulled out, and just start putting stuff down. If I work on one cohesive spread, then that's great, but I'm thinking I'm in the mood to jump around a little bit and just put stuff down. This may not amount to much in the end, but it's going to be good base layers for me when I want to come back and keep working on this. Sometimes it's hard to sit down and do a full spread from very beginning layers to end. And so when you can give yourself a head start and do a little bit of pre-work when you're in the mood, it's nice to get some of those background layers down. That makes it so that we're not overthinking things so much when we go to actually work on the page. My main goal here is to not overthink things. Just see what inspires me and put it down on the page. Keeping in mind that this does not have to be a finished spread, but rather just a couple pieces to get me inspired, maybe for later when I come back to it. Anything I'm putting on these first layers might end up getting covered up. And it gives me more freedom to not be so conservative with my movements, to really give myself the freedom to just put marks on the page and just do what feels good right in that moment. There's time to refine things later and make sure it fits however I want it to fit. But if we don't ever allow ourselves the freedom to let loose and just put stuff on the page, we become too bound up in our creativity. We become too perfectionistic, and that's one thing for me that I always try to combat is not always striving for that perfection, and because perfection really doesn't even exist anyway. We just get these ideas in our head of what things need to look like, and it's all just made up. So giving ourselves that freedom, especially when we're working in these first layers here where it may or may not get covered up, but if we don't like it, then we have the choice to cover it up and to move on from there. Don't feel like you need to choose as limited of a color palette as I do. Since this book was already black and whites, it inspired me to stay with that neutral theme. I also think it would be gorgeous adding pops of color throughout. A limited color palette comes very naturally to me, and it's my happy place. And so if that is not the case for you, go wild with your colors. Choose any color that you want, all of the colors that you want. Don't feel like you're limited. For me, I get overwhelmed with too many choices. And so by telling myself up front when I'm choosing supplies that I just have to think about blacks and whites and neutral, the whole neutral color palette, it really helps me to not feel as overwhelmed. And that goes when I'm choosing other color schemes as well. If I always open myself up to everything, I actually get quite anxious and overwhelmed, and then I don't end up making any progress. Plus, for me, working in those limited color schemes comes very naturally, and I can do it without too much thought, but go to the color scheme and any style that fits you best. Since I'm working on multiple pages at once throughout my journal, I will be drying all my paint before I flip to the next page. If you find yourself taking too long to make a decision and you're hemming and hawing around it, you can do one or two things. Make a quick decision, force yourself to make one, and just live with it, or move on, come back to it. If you're working like I am, where I'm just moving through the pages here and putting stuff down, move on to something else. Come back later. Don't put so much pressure on yourself that it all has to be perfect right away, right from the very beginning. The thought that these are not finished pieces of artwork, finished spreads in the art journal, is actually allowing me to be a lot more loose. I think if I had started out trying to just make this a spread, I would have added a lot more things and overdone it. It helps me to go with a different mindset. So I'll definitely be exploring this concept more of just working in the journal rather than a spread at a time, which is the way that I typically work. Writing into the paint that is still wet almost gives it a carved out appearance. And if you do it with a pencil, you'll leave some more pencil impressions and you'll kind of get more of a varied look. Careful if your page underneath the paint is too wet, or just the paint that's wet and your page isn't too saturated, then you'll probably be okay. Over here, I did do the matte medium on the collage part ahead of time and then added paint, so the page was already quite saturated and you can see it threatening to rip through more. I really like this little glassine pocket that I have, or envelope, or whatever you want to call it, and so I think it would be really fun to find a place to include that and maybe put a few little goodies inside. I think it's a little bit too tall for this journal. On this particular one, I don't want it sticking out too far, although I think it looks pretty cool that way too. What I'm going to attempt to do is take it apart and kind of restructure it. It's actually okay with me if it doesn't turn out exactly like it was before. Actually, I really like the little tears and stuff that created, so maybe I'll just leave it on that side. Let's see. Yeah, that's a better size, I think. Okay, I don't know where this envelope is going to go yet. Maybe on this page, maybe not. But I think I'd kind of like to close up these sides a little bit with this thread. I would normally just use black embroidery thread, but I don't know where that's at the moment. I really do want a messy look actually. So what I'm going to do is take, this is just regular sewing weight thread, and I'm going to quadruple it, and it gives it a really nice messy look. So this is just another instance of working with what you have and making it work for you. And I don't have a plan for my stitching. I'm just gonna start going around the sides and see if I like the appearance of it. I had thought about doing some X's or something, but I don't think I want to be that precise. So I'm just gonna kind of go around front to back. The further you go in towards the middle, the less of an opening that you will have. So like right here, that will take some of that opening away. I often like to do my interactive elements before I even do the binding, but on this one, I think it makes a fun little fold out, and I really like the way that that looks in there. And I can still do stuff behind it if I want. I can tuck stuff into the envelope. I could do some stitching on this side too, but I don't think I will. It was more just for aesthetic purposes that I did it. Maybe I will do a staple or two on this side. Yeah. If you don't like a page, it's perfectly fine to completely cover it up with another piece of paper, to paint over it with gesso and act as if it is a brand new page. You can either cut it to size to start with, or sometimes I just like to glue onto it and then rip it down to size or cut it to size. I feel like the raw edges help it a little bit to feel like it was always meant to be that way. I also really love this wrapping paper, so it's kind of fun to give it its own page in the journal. I've been working in the journal long enough now that I'm starting to overthink things a little bit as I keep going, and so I think it's a nice place to stop. What I am going to do is I never like any paint to go to waste, and so the paint that's left on my palette, I'm going to go ahead and just put it in the book. It can be very random, just kind of wiped on there, maybe some different marks, but that's going to help me on some of these pages that weren't so inspiring to begin with, to give it a nice little something so that when I come back, it's going to be a nice inspiring start. Let me know down in the comments if you prefer working in a journal like this or a more traditional style where you work on a page at a time. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe and I'll see you next week. Bye.